Welcome to the Impact Driven Entrepreneur, the podcast that helps you expand your reach and convert that reach into clients so you can lead your tribe with confidence and create change in the world while living the life you desire. And now your host, certified business coach and consultant, Mariana Ruiz.
Welcome back to the Impact Driven Entrepreneur. Today we are talking with Becky Mollenkamp, and she's a professional and personal development coach for women, identified business owners through her coaching community and courses. Welcome, Becky. So excited to meet you.
Hi, you too. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to doing what you do.
Yeah, it's been a long journey. So I actually have 2 degrees in journalism. I knew from the time I was, 8, that I was going to grow up and be a writer, which I did. And I worked for a newspaper and then for magazines for a long time. Then I, in 2005, left the publishing world full-time in the cubicle life to be my own boss because I wanted to work in my pajamas, which I did for a long time. And so that's my background. And then through a series of events, which we'll talk about a little bit more, I ended up eventually wanting to change what I was doing. I realized that writing wasn't as fulfilling for me anymore. And it was when I had my son that I was like, I want to do something that feels, more meaningful in some way. I think having a kid changes things for a lot of women in that way. And so that's when I really, about 2 years ago, decided I wanted to make the shift and start doing more coaching for women than doing what I had been doing, which was writing and then content marketing. But I've been self-employed since 2005. So it's been quite a long journey.
That's awesome. So tell us about that, right? Because I know a lot of the people listening are moms and are also going through that shift of identity and all the changes that happen. So tell us about that and how that went.
Yeah, it was something because I've always been the person who did what they should. I grew up with a brother who we'll talk a bit about more, who was pretty troubled. And so in my house, there was always a lot of chaos and I was the good kid. And so that was sort of the role that was given to me from a young age. And so I always sort of did what I thought I was supposed to do, what was the right thing to do. And I made most of my decisions in life that way. It's not the best place to necessarily make decisions. When I was a child, there was more of a necessity for it. But as I grew up and was able to not make decisions that way, I didn't know how not to. That was just what I did. So it took a long time, but having a child really changed things because there's something that happens. Probably a lot of it was hormonal, I'm sure, but also just realizing that I didn't want to role model for my son that anymore, that you shouldn't do the things you want to do, or you shouldn't seek something that's fulfilling. And I knew I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I hadn't for a long time. I sort of said I would be a writer, and then I was good at it, but it didn't mean that I loved it. I honestly don't know that I ever really loved it. I like writing for myself, but not for other people. And so having him, I was like, I don't want to continue the rest of my life just being like, well, this is what I do because I'm supposed to do this. So it sort of pushed me. And then I have a mastermind group. At the time, it was a different mastermind group that was really amazing. And they really helped me. My partner, who's now my husband, really helped me. And it was a lot of just spending a lot of time through self-exploration and realizing, what does this look like? What do I want to do that's not writing? Because I always sort of thought I had no other marketable skills. I realized that I do have a lot of ways that I can help. And through a lot of introspection and also talking with other people that knew me, I was able to kind of uncover some of those gifts and realize what I really wanted to do. But all of that comes on the heels of my brother, who I mentioned, having passed away. And that was probably the thing that really first shook me out of my slumber, out of that I'm just doing the things I should, because that was what really helped me realize life was too short to keep living that way.
Yeah, that is so stressful. So tell us about that. How did you handle it when it happened? And because I know that was actually something really powerful for you, right?
Sure. Life is hard, right? All of us have struggles that come up, and grief is, if you live long enough, hopefully if you're lucky to live long enough to have grief in your life, it means you've lived a long life. And sometimes, unfortunately, even if you don't live a long life, you experience grief. But very few of us escape having grief in our life. It's something that happens. And so for me, I had lost a cousin and grandparents, but I hadn't experienced grief for me at this level until my brother died. He died of a drug overdose in 2010. He was 30, which is far too young to be losing people. And my brother was ahead of the trend. I mean, now heroin is an epidemic, and we're all finally starting to realize what an epidemic this is and how horrible it is and how many people were losing to it. But my brother was early. It was before people were talking about it. There was still, I mean, I still unfortunately think there's a massive stigma around drug abuse and around heroin use specifically. But maybe it's beginning to lessen a bit. But certainly when my brother died 8 years ago, there was definitely a stigma. But we had I knew my brother was troubled for a long time and had been using for a long time. So when I got the call that my brother had died, it was equal parts like confirmation of something I just knew would happen and complete and total shock and not knowing how to like function. And I had been self-employed at that point for like 5 years and successful. I mean, I had 6-figure business. I didn't have to struggle to find clients up until about the year before my brother died. And in this 1 year of my life, the economy tanked in 2009. And as such, magazines started folding, and that was the bulk of my clientele. So my business was starting to struggle for the first time. I had gone from a 6-figure business to struggling to make 30,000 that year. And then after my brother died, it got worse. So the economy tanked. And at the same time, my marriage was falling apart. So I ended up getting divorced, losing my brother. My grandmother also died like 3 months before my brother. And then having to lose my house in the process of losing the marriage and my business all falling apart. So it was a year from hell. I mean, it was a really hard year, but I don't think I'm an exception to the rule. I think lots of people go through those kinds of years. And I learned so much through it that I'm now able to help others with, where it's like the things that we can let those things defeat us, which I did at that time and nearly lost my business. But through that, I learned so many better ways to handle those situations that when I later was faced with grief, because later I had a miscarriage, I handled things very differently and did not almost lose my business. In fact, my business grew. So, it was a tough experience, but I learned a lot, which I think is all we can hope for, right?
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and for sharing that, because I know that that's not an easy time, and also like just so many things, right? Like that's a lot.
Yeah, I think, as I said, the stigma around mental illness and specifically drug abuse. And I also know it's interesting when you lose someone to drug abuse. Suicide is another situation where there's so much stigma around that, and people who are grieving the loss of someone to suicide, there's a lot of kinship with people who have lost someone to a drug overdose, because they're treated very much the same in our society, where it's like, well, they chose that thing. We don't talk about the mental illness piece and the fact that they're really, for most people, that's not a choice. It's something that they're just trying to survive in the world, or they can't survive with what's going on. So anyway, there's so much stigma around it, around how my brother died. And then also just, this country doesn't grieve well. We don't handle grief well in the US. Our culture isn't good with grief. It makes us uncomfortable. Other people's grief makes us uncomfortable because it makes us face our own mortality, and that's something we're not real comfortable with. And so we don't allow people to grieve well. We don't respect grieving. So I like to talk about these things because I want people to know, like, everyone grieves. We all lose people. If we live long enough, we're going to lose people. That's just part of life. Death is part of life. And I want other people to know that they're not alone, because it feels so incredibly lonely, because we don't know how to grieve well in this country. And it feels so lonely. And then if you have the added layer of losing someone to something that's got so much stigma around it, that leaves a person with a lot of guilt or shame, that shouldn't be there, that I want to say, like, you're also not alone in that. And I think people need to talk about it more. The ones who can. I understand not everyone can go there, but I feel like it's my responsibility to talk about this stuff so people do know that they're not alone, because I think that's the problem we have. People feel so alone because people aren't willing to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and right. And I think the other piece of this was like, it was so many things, right? Like it was like
when it rains, it pours.
Yes. Right. So how did you get yourself back on your feet? And like, to somebody who is at either one of those turning points, right? Like what kinds of things would you say to them now?
Well, what I learned in that time was a lot of how not to do it, because I didn't handle things well. And I was alone. I was going through a divorce, and I was living in a different state than the rest of my family, which my family is small anyway. It was really my parents, because there was just the two of us, my brother and I. But I was away from my family and going through a divorce. So I was very alone, which is not a good thing. In those times, sometimes we think we want to be alone, or we think we need to be alone, but that can be pretty detrimental, especially if you're not getting any kind of outside help. And I got no help. I didn't get any therapy. I didn't talk to many people. I ended up drinking a lot, which is interesting, having lost my brother to addiction. I'm not somebody who I think has addictive genes or personality or whatever that trait is. But I did have a period there where I was really self-medicating a lot because I couldn't deal with feeling my feelings at all. I was in the denial stage of grief for a really long time and not asking for help. And business-wise, I was just letting bridges burn left and right. I didn't tell people what was going on, or I did, but didn't say I need help, or I need time, or I can't do this project. I was just taking work and then not doing it. I was just really in such a state of denial that I couldn't face anything, including my work. I couldn't really face anything. And so that's really like the how not to do it thing, is to not talk about it, to not get any kind of help, to not let people know that you need help or space or time or whatever that looks like, trying to just continue on as if nothing has happened. I understand it, because I understand why I felt I needed that, but I wish that I had been able at that time to get some amount of help, because I wouldn't have burned my bridges and burnt that business down to almost nothing. I ended up having to get a bridge job, and there's no shame in that. I think that is something that people should consider when you're going through a really hard time. I think part of what happens for a lot of us business owners is we think, well, I just got to soldier on and I got to make everything work. And you take on so much. And now that you've added this helping of grief on top of what you're already trying to do in life, that's a real recipe for, meltdown, for a disaster for yourself. And so there's
financial, right? Like the financial side, right?
Yeah. I mean, whether it's a divorce or grief or some other thing, and divorce has its own level of grief that goes with that as well. So, but when you're going through those hard times, you can easily make decisions that you're not even realize you're making decisions, because you're just so not available to even really be in the headspace to make decisions. But the things you are doing, the actions you're taking, are decisions you're making that are affecting your life, affecting yourself personally, but then also, like you said, your financial situation, which is hard. And if you don't have people you can lean on for support during that time financially, I know that there's that feeling of like, I have to do this stuff, but then you're not doing it well, or you're ruining your reputation, where it's more that if I had just taken the time to say to clients, I need more time. I need some time to grieve. Like, can I have an extra month on this project? Or could you give this to someone else, but come back to me? Like, but instead, by saying, okay, I'll do it, and then just not doing it, or not doing it well, I ruined those relationships for future work. Not only did I ruin that potential paycheck, but all future paychecks from those people. Where if you take that time to say, like, I need some time, or maybe I can't do this right now, but please, I will be here again in 2 months. I'll take on projects, and please come back to me. It's amazing the compassion people will show you. But when you don't do that and then just burn your bridges, then that's what can really harm you long term. And so then I ended up getting a bridge job, which again, I think that's a really viable and good option for a lot of people. And it was for me, because I needed that. I needed the structure that came with a 9-to-5 versus me having to try and force that structure on myself at a time when I was not in a good headspace, but knowing I had like the alarm go off, I had to go to this place, they were going to expect me. Then I left at the end of the day, and I didn't take my work home with me. It was like that kind of a job. That was what I needed at that time. It was hard to admit I needed that, though. It felt like failure, where it shouldn't feel like failure, So I think that that's something for people to think about too, is, sometimes we have to make those decisions, and they don't have to be, it's not like a lifelong decision. That job was like a year. It's a year. It's a year for me to heal, a year for me to not have the weight of the world of trying to run a business on my shoulders on top of everything else. And so it was a good decision, but it felt like failure because of how we, I think, treat business owners or, people. Like if things don't go the way you thought they would, then somehow that's a failure, and it's not.
Absolutely. I love that. I think that's so important. And there's so many situations that can come up, right? Like everyone listening probably knows my story. Like I had a daughter who was a preemie and she was 2 pounds, right? So but being an ICU nurse for as many years as I was, the doctor sent her home to me like on breathing monitors. So like, it was like, you can handle this. And I was like, yeah, I can technically, right? Uh, but, that was really hard, and it did force me to put my big girl panties on and like go forward and march forward. But that was definitely not easy. And there were moments there where I leaned on consulting, I leaned on other side projects, and it's kind of like you're saying with the bridge job, right? It's like there's no shame in doing what you have to do to give yourself the time, the space. Like I personally, I had to be with my daughter at home. So like being a nurse, I couldn't like go to a job at the hospital, a traditional job, right? But it's like in those moments that like we get to take the support that the universe is showing us, right?
Yeah, and ask for it too. I didn't want to, again, it was like I didn't even want to ask people for help because it felt in some way like I was failing, like I'm expected, I should be able to do it all. I should be able to take care of everything. And just because this thing has happened. And there's also this thing that happens where we have comparison about pain. Like, oh, but it could be worse, so I shouldn't feel bad about this or whatever. Like the divorce. Well, other people have bigger things going on than that. And like I should, or, even my brother's death, but then somebody else lost their child, or, that's worth this ranking of pain that we
worseness,
do.
yeah.
Is really unfair, because your pain is your pain and it's real to you. And it's okay to ask for help if you need help. Even if somebody else, even if there are people who have it worse, it doesn't mean that your pain isn't real and that you don't need help. And it's okay to ask for that help. But I got really trapped up into a lot of what society tells us, the messages that we hear about like what's okay and not okay. And I think there was also, I was dealing with all of my own guilt and shame around my brother's, the circumstances of his death, and feeling like maybe I wasn't allowed to ask for help because, if my brother had died of cancer, then people might have shown up with, casseroles. But when it's, something like this, nobody wants to talk about it. And so then it seems like you're not allowed to ask for help. And that's just, it's really an unfair thing that we do in this world. So, and I fell victim to that sort of thing, And so I learned a lot through that. It's okay to ask for help. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength, which I've really, that was a hard thing for me to realize, because I've always thought of, crying as a weakness, or asking for help as a weakness, or any of these things is like weakness. And I've learned through the act of finally doing those things that, oh no, that takes incredible strength, to show up and to be honest and to be real and to let people see the chinks in your armor. That takes strength to do. That's not something that's like weak, because weak people don't have the strength to do that. I was weak and thought I was being strong.
That is so deep and powerful. Yeah. I also want to acknowledge here too is like our own thoughts and our own emotions, and like how being in denial and trying to shove that away, like just simply does not work. But I think with that, right, comes the next layer of like dealing with that, right? Because dealing with that does take a lot of strength. I mean, I've been down the ringer on that myself, right? And it's like every time that I don't deal with it, it actually hurts more long term,
Absolutely. I mean, it was totally detrimental to my business by not being able to just be honest with myself and with others about where I was at. And it's not even so much the denial around my brother's death, but the denial of how I was behaving. I denied to myself about how I was behaving. I thought I just couldn't even deal with it until finally, it kind of all after a year of acting like an idiot. I mean, really, I was just acting like a college kid at 35 years old because I just couldn't deal with anything. I finally had to like look at my life and think, what am I doing here? This is not healthy. This is not okay. And I lost so many friends and, people through that time. And what it did teach me too now is about how to be a better friend to people. But I don't blame anyone, because if you haven't been through something like that, you don't know what it means to like what grief can look like, because we have this idea again in our culture that like grief is like a 3-day process.
Totally.
You get 3 days off work. Maybe if you have a generous company, they'll give you a week if it's a really close death. But like you're supposed to lose your child and a week later be back at work. And people don't want to deal with your ugliness at that point. Like, you need to be done with the crying. Don't make us uncomfortable. We don't want to have to feel icky. We don't have to think about our own child dying or whatever, you know, like that's how we deal with it here. We don't realize that. I mean, I certainly learned through that process that grief is not simple, and it's not the same for every person. And it's not even though we have these stages of grief, it is not a linear process.
Not linear at all.
No, right. It is not as simple as that. Everyone grieves differently. Everyone takes different amount of time. Some people are in denial for a year and then go through the other stages really fast. Some people don't ever do denial. Like it's so different for every person. But when we expect everybody to grieve the same way, that's really unfair. So I've learned a lot, but I also understand that that's the world we're in. So I lost friends that I don't fault them. They just didn't know. If you've never lost somebody that close to you or been through that experience, you just don't understand. The people who stuck with me though, those will be the friends for the rest of my life, because they were there and they like saw the crazy person and said, I'm going to love her through this. And I know at some point she's going to be able to come out the other side of that. And they were right. And I'm a better person than I've ever been, thanks to having lost my brother and everything I went through. So now I know how to help people more during those times than I would have ever known before, where I can see if somebody is, because like you said, at that place of denying things, there weren't a lot of people there to sort of hold my hand and help me because they didn't understand. And now I'm hopeful that I can at least be that person to help save that space for somebody and create that space for them and just say, I'm here for you when you're ready. Wow. Because I didn't have a ton of that. I had some of that, but not a ton of that. And so I think we need to do better. And I think as a grief counselor or somebody who's been through this stuff that, I mean, like America's not great at grieving.
Yes, no. And it's, I mean, I dealt when I was working as a transplant coordinator, many deaths just like your brother's. Like so many people that we would get calls on were brain dead due to overdose. I mean, that's very, very common in my field where I was working. And it's horrific because the family is usually in complete shock, and it's very, very traumatizing for everybody. But like you said, it's never linear. So, and you never know kind of like how different members of the family will react. I mean, very similar to everything you've said. So tell me how when you had the loss of your child, right?
Sorry. I was my brother. I was just saying some people lose their child. Miscarriage.
No, your miscarriage.
Yeah, miscarriage.
Yes. Tell me how you handled that differently on the business side, because I think that is a really good learning opportunity for everyone.
Yeah, that experience was very different. And it was equally shocking. I mean, I walked in one day with the baby with a heartbeat, and then there wasn't. And it was quite a process of having to go through DNC and all of the stuff that goes with that too, physically being difficult, emotionally being incredibly difficult.
Hormones, right? Yeah.
Everything. Yeah. But then also running a business and I needed, needed to make the money. And I was in I had gone through all of this with my brother, and I was such a different person at that point. I knew more having been through that. Like right from the beginning, I was able to say, okay, I'm depressed, with reason. And I'm going through grief. Like I could recognize it more quickly. And I knew like, okay, what I can't do here is drink it away, because I know that doesn't work. I've been through that. I know that doesn't work. It's not going to do anything for me.
It's not going to go away. Right?
Yeah. And so I'm like, I have to face this. And number one is I have to give my self space to feel. Because I learned the last time, like I ran from my feelings for a long time, and guess what? They didn't go anywhere. They catch up to you. You can run from your feelings as long as you want, but those feelings are not going to go away. Feelings have one job. Their job is to be felt, and they will force you to do it at some point. So if you try to run from those feelings, eventually they're going to catch up to you and say, no, we're here. We're going to be felt. I just delayed the process last time. I delayed the inevitable. This time I was like, I'm going to feel the feelings. It sucks, but I'm going to do it. So I was like, I'm in bed and I'm feeling these feelings for as long as I need to. And so I knew that I also had a business, and what does that look like? So I got really honest. I emailed my clients and said, here's what's happened. I hadn't told any of them I was pregnant. I was 10 weeks pregnant, so I wasn't yet comfortable sharing with, we had shared with our family, but I hadn't shared with, any of my clients. So this email came out of the blue to them, but it was, here's what's happened. I was pregnant. I've had a miscarriage. I'm going through a lot emotionally and physically, and I'm going to need some time. So can I either get an extension on your project, or can you, is there someone else you can give this project to? And please know that I'll still be here and looking to come back and work with you again. I just need a break. It was a scary email to send because a lot of my clients were male. Not that that should matter, but it felt like it mattered, telling a woman that you've been through a miscarriage it feels like a different experience than telling a man, even though, 1 out of 4 women have miscarriages, and many of those women also have men in their lives who experience the grief as well. So it's not like men haven't experienced this thing, but, and so I was a little scared, but the responses were amazing. Every person was incredibly kind. No one said, "Oh, I can't believe you can't do my project. How dare you? How dare you need time?" Everyone said, "I'm so sorry. You can have as much time as you need." Some of them gave me more time on the projects. Some of them did have to give projects to other people just because of, how deadlines work and, life has to go on, even though I need this time. But everyone was incredibly kind and gave me time. And I took my time, and it did mean losing some money, which was hard. And I know that not everyone has that privilege of being able to take some time financially away. That is one of the things I like to try and work with clients on, is how do we build space in your financials so that when life happens, you can take time, because again, life happens to all of us. Hard things happen to everyone, and we need to be prepared. We need to weather, rainy day proof our business, because this stuff can happen. And luckily I was in that position. Not everyone is, and I know that, but wherever possible, trying to give yourself that space is important. So the biggest thing was taking the time to feel my feelings and asking for help, both professionally and personally. I talked to friends. I hadn't done that before. I told friends what was going on. People who didn't know I was pregnant, telling them this thing has happened. I leaned on even my business friends, my professional friends, like in my mastermind group, and saying this thing has happened. I need support. And that made so much difference in just taking that time to feel it. And the grief period was, I think, shorter than it might have been if I hadn't done that, because I was like, I'm gonna do this. And then when I started to feel like, okay, I think I can take some work, I started slowly too. That was the other big thing, was reintroducing myself into work in a slower fashion, taking a little bit at a time to make sure I really was okay before I started getting right back into everything and then feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think that is all so beautiful. And I think that there's the piece of us, right, that wants to be strict and rigid and do the right thing, right? And yet there's this loving motheriness of us that's like, no, we need to give ourselves all of the space and all of the time that we really need. And look how beautiful that outcome was when you did honor that for yourself.
Well, and I think as women in particular in the business world, the business world has a historically more masculine energy about it, because women are newer to the business world. It's been historically run more by men, and now thankfully that's changing and women are making up much more of the workforce. But we have sort of come into the workforce, I think, trying to make ourselves fit into an existing structure, rather than saying the structure should fit us. Like, how can we change the structure to fit us? And not to say every woman's the same, obviously, and I'm very sensitive to all of those issues and around gender, but I think there is a bit of a history to masculine workspaces, because men for the longest time were the only ones who worked, and then women now are working, and that's been a lot of time, but that feminine energy I don't think has been as honored and respected. And I think that that's something that's important to say. It's okay to say, and this, by the way, is feminine energy, whether you're male or female. I'm talking about that the softer side.
Yeah. My people are into the woo. They know.
Good. I make sure they know that I'm not trying, because I want to be I want to honor that there are plenty of men who have a lot of feminine energy, and they need that respect too, because I think we do a disservice to a lot of men by saying that, they're not allowed to cry. I mean, that's insanity. Of course they have to cry. So, but the more that I was,
causes so many problems.
Absolutely.
That right there.
And that's where when I messaged many of my male clients about this uniquely woman experience of having had a miscarriage, even though, like I said, men also have had experiences with being the partner in those situations. But I wasn't sure what to expect. And I love that the men honored what I needed and were caring, you know? And I think that we also have to have some amount of trust in saying that this feminine energy can be honored, and can be part of work. Like, I think there is that feeling of like, I have to show up strong. Professional means strong. It means never showing my soft side or my weak side or the woo side or any of that. Like, if I'm professional means masculine. That is what I think we have historically sort of associated as professional. And I don't think that needs to be the case. And certainly when you're self-employed, you get to make the rules. So it doesn't have to be that way. And so I think it's great to be able to say, I'm going to, say I can be vulnerable, I can be real, I can talk about these things, I can share, and I can even cry, and it doesn't mean that I'm not professional.
Yes. Yeah. And as a business owner and CEO, you get to call the shots. So if you want to integrate that into your business structure, like, I mean, it's hugely valuable, right? Like, I mean, I always tell my team, like, we are caring people, like we are making a difference in the world. And like, if I didn't allow them to go at it from their heart-centered place, then like all the sales they're doing or all the activity they're doing is going to feel really rigid and not aligned, right? So like, you get to create that culture, and however you foster that, right? Like,
yeah. And I think you need to honor the entirety of yourself, which means that sometimes you are showing up and you're strong and you're kicking butt and you're, all of that stuff. And sometimes life happens and it's hard, or you just have a bad day and you just need to like feel the feelings, and that's okay too. Like, and none of that has to do with professionalism. Professionalism is, do you do the stuff you say you're going to do for your clients and do a killer job? Are you, delivering what it is that you promised to deliver to the world? Are you doing good work? That's professionalism. Whether you have a bad day and might need to cry in your office, or whether you're showing up in a power suit, none of that has to do with professionalism. But I think
absolutely,
society kind of gets us a little twisted on what everything means. And so I think you're right that some people don't feel like they're allowed to feel things, that they have to show up a certain way as a business owner.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. This has been so helpful. I'm sure to everybody who's ever gone through anything grief-wise or troubled times in your business. And like, I think you're such a great, like, I loved how in your story and like what you went through, it was like, I did it, quote unquote, the unhealthy wrong way the first time, but then you applied and you changed it for the second time that something like that happened. So I love that visual, really clear difference. And I loved your vulnerability and just willing to share openly with us, because I know that this is all deep. And yeah. So.
Well, thank you. My goal is just, one, so that people don't feel alone, and two, to help people maybe see, because if you haven't been through this and then suddenly tomorrow something happens in your life, and again, it doesn't even have to be the most traumatic thing, but just something where you need some time, that maybe it'll be in your head to think like, okay, it's okay to ask for what I need, or it's okay to take some time, or whatever. Just maybe learn from having heard that I did it the wrong way. So I'm there if it helps anyone.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, because even when you talked about shame, like there can be so much shame around, like, if you're just having depression. Like when I was a nurse, I really struggled with anxiety and depression because I was not aligned. I didn't feel fulfilled in my career, even though I was doing great work and it was life-changing, right? But it was not the life-changing that I wanted it to be, like how I am now, right? However, right, there is so much stigma around, like, but there's nothing wrong with you. Why are you depressed? You have a great career. You've climbed up the corporate ladder. You've got all the things that you should be happy about, right? And like, there is no shame in any of that, right? Like there is no shame in your journey, and your feelings are what they are, right? And
Yeah, I so relate to that, because getting into coaching, I had the same thing where it was like, I went through a bit of that took me so long to get out of well, I should be happy with this. Why can't I? What's wrong with me that I'm not happy with this thing I said I was going to do? And here I am being successful. And what's wrong with me? And there is that shame with that. And I would love to see any part I can play in helping people not have that shame, and removing some of that from their lives would be great.
Yeah, it's amazing. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Becky. So tell us where people can find you. What's your, I know you have a website and some other cool things. So share.
Sure. Well, BeckyMollenkamp.com is the easiest way to find everything. And I'm sure the info will probably be in the show notes. So if you can't spell it, because it's not the easiest to spell, but yeah. And I do coaching one-on-one. And then I also have a membership community and a couple of courses. So there's lots of ways that you can work with me, get to know me. I also have a free Facebook community if people want to join that. So you can find
what's your Facebook group called?
Own It, Crush It, because I really believe that we have to own our authority, own ourselves as bosses, own our feelings, own all of it before we can really start to crush it. And I think very often we try to start the other way, which is let me crush my goals, but then we don't actually deal with the stuff between our ears. And until you deal with that, I don't think that you can really crush it the way you want. So that's what Own It, Crush It.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you so much. And so we will link all of that in the show notes. I'm going to invite you to join our community. It's the Coaching for Impact community. And then you can connect with everyone there as well.
That'd be great.
Awesome.
Thank
you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Head on over to impactdrivenentrepreneur.com, where you can find an arsenal of videos, blog posts, and previous podcast episodes to help you increase your profit and impact. Again, impactdrivenentrepreneur.com, and click on blog. Enjoy.